So, if you are not a parent of a school-aged child, and if you missed last week when we blessed all the backpacks, let me tell you, school is in session. And for those of you who are well aware that school is in session because you've had to go, you know that the beginning of the school year often brings new schedules and new chaos and lots of new activities. And so as the school year starts, or maybe you've just asked yourself this question anyway, the one question that we must ask as our schedules fill is, how can I do this particular task more efficiently? How can I shave off 5 minutes of my morning routine so that I can get there just a little earlier? How can I do 4 errands in the space of the 30-minute soccer practice? How can I get a bigger lawnmower so that I can mow the lawn a little faster so that we can get done with that and get to the golf course? How can I squeeze more stuff into my already very tight schedule? This is the question that we ask ourselves over and over and over again. Now, some of you may say, oh yeah, I remember when life was like that, but I've retired now and life is good. Well, that's great, but most of you, see, I hear this laughter because I know I've talked to you. You retired and then you got busier, didn't you? And so this happens too, and all of us somehow find ourselves striving to fit more and more stuff in our day. And do you know that even if you think you don't care about that, all of the advertisers and the manufacturers care about it, and they want you to care too. So they sell you vacuums that will do your work for you, right? Buy a $500 Roomba, and you no longer have to vacuum because you don't have time. Buy a new DVR because you don't have time to sit and watch TV when it's on. Buy an Instapot because it's instant, right? And I'm not saying that any of these things are bad. They're very good and helpful things, and I really want a Roomba. But I'm just saying that the manufacturers are trying to convince you each and every day that you don't have enough time. You don't have enough time, and you need to go faster. This is the problem of our culture. We schedule and we overschedule, and we try to cram in just a little bit more, and we chase this dream of being perfect, of being the perfect employee. So we have to get there a little earlier and stay a little later and do a little extra so that we're better than all the other employees and we look really good. Or we try to be the perfect parent, and that means we have to sign our kids up for a couple more other things so that they can go to Yale and Harvard for free, and so that we can really, really have the best kids and enrich them in the best possible way. Or maybe we try to be the best friend, and so we overschedule ourselves. Yeah, sure, I've got time for coffee in the midst of all of my other crazy. Absolutely, I would love to talk to you for 4 hours when I don't really have any time. And again, none of these things are bad, but when we schedule it all in and chase this dream of being perfect, it makes us a little stressed out. And when we're stressed out because we've been trying to do too much other stuff, here's what happens. We begin to overflow with our emotions, and we snap at people who are closest to us and the most vulnerable. And then we have to wallow in guilt for a couple hours after that, or maybe a couple weeks after that. And all of it piles up and adds to the stress and the craziness. So we need a way out. We need a way out of this cycle of crazy. We need a way to break busy. Which leads us to our newest sermon series. You saw it on the front of your connection. We're calling it Breaking Busy. And we cleverly came up with this title by stealing it directly from the book Breaking Busy by Allie Worthington. She opens the book by telling this story about how she was in San Francisco at a conference, and she was speaking there, and she had to get back to Nashville to her 5 boys, and she was all stressed out, as often happens. And so even though she's not a morning person, she decided she needed to catch the early morning flight, and so she scheduled the shuttle to come pick her up at 3 a.m. and take her to the airport. Now, some of you really like that time, but she was not a morning person, so this was not a good life choice for her. So she falls asleep in the shuttle, and drool's like hanging out of her mouth, and they have to wake her up when they get to the airport, and she groggily gets up and gathers all her stuff, and she goes into the airport, and she's standing in line, and she's looking around for her ticket, and she realizes, in that way that you know things, her cell phone's on the shuttle. It's not in her purse. It's not in her backpack. She can't find it anywhere. So frantically, she turns to the people behind her and she says, I have to borrow your cell phone right now so that I can call my phone because I left it on the shuttle and you've got to help me. And so this couple hands over their cell phone to her and she dials her number and she waits. And then her shirt starts ringing. On the airport shuttle, she tucked the phone inside her shirt, and there it was. So she's now mortified, glad she found her phone, but mortified of that it had been with her all the time. Now, as I read this, I will confess to you that I had just the day before been trying to make dinner, and I took the carrots out of the refrigerator and I went to peel them, and I thought, where's the vegetable peeler? I know I just had it. And I looked all over the kitchen. It was in the refrigerator on the shelf where the carrots are. And so we all have these problems, right? I was really grateful for this story because it made me feel a little less bad. But anyway, as she was flying home, she started looking at this phone that had been lost and looking at it carefully and saw the battery indicator on it. You know, we all have that battery indicator, and the battery shrinks and then gets red, and then it beeps at you when it's almost out of charge. And Allie writes this as she thought about that battery indicator. Wouldn't life be so much easier if we each had a readout that told us this is your remaining capacity? Your energy levels are low. You need to stop and recharge. Please stop and recharge. That's what we need to hear sometimes because we're not always good at diagnosing it ourselves. Sometimes we need a good friend or a family member to do this for us. And that has been the case throughout time, even as far back as Moses. So our story that Alan read for us this morning is that story. This story takes place right after Moses and the Israelites have escaped Egypt. They've crossed the Red Sea, but they haven't yet been to Mount Sinai and received the Ten Commandments. So they're in transit, and they're camping in the wilderness. And as they're journeying through the wilderness, Moses' father-in-law comes to visit the camp. And he comes, and the first day he just sits and he hears the stories of how God was good and rescued the people. And it's this incredible story. And then the next day he watches Moses at work. And Moses, all day long, from morning when the sun first comes up until dusk when the sun goes down, listens to people complain. Now, you got to imagine, that's a long, frustrating day, right, to do once. He did it every day, all day, listening to people bring cases before him. And Jethro, that's Moses' father-in-law, watches this for a little while, and he shakes his head, and he goes and he pulls Moses aside, and he said, what you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Then Jethro proceeds to work with Moses to find a strategy to break busy and appoint leaders to help him with his work. I love this story. I think it's one that speaks so powerfully to our culture today. What you are doing is not good. Trying to cram all this stuff into a day or a weekend, it's not good. You will surely wear yourselves out. These are words that we need to hear. How many of you are feeling stressed out and working beyond capacity? And if you heard these words from a trusted friend, would you have the strength to plug in and recharge your batteries? You see, sometimes we take the phone and it's at 10% and we think, I can make it a little longer. And we don't plug it in, right? And sometimes we do that with our bodies too. We don't recharge when we need to. A few years ago, I went to the conference's mandatory boundary training, and it's not, I'll tell you, my favorite training that I have to go to, but I went, and this one was really good. The speaker talked about signs that you are overstressed. She was talking about self-care and how important it is. And she said that she loved, her comfort go-to snack is Cheetos dipped in milk. Now, I got to tell you, that sounds so gross to me. I can hardly imagine it. But for her, and I've heard a couple other people since then say they really like that. So if that's your go-to snack, more power to you. But anyway, she loved this snack, and she said, when I find myself eating Cheetos dipped in milk several nights in a row, I know that I've got a problem, and I have to stop and figure out what it is. And I thought, that's so ridiculous. Why didn't you know that you had a problem anyway? Like, why didn't you know that the reason I'm going to my comfort food is because I'm stressed out? But then afterwards, I went home and I started doing my stuff, and I realized that I go through seasons, and I find myself eating a little more ice cream every night, or watching a little more Netflix, or whatever it is, and I do get in these seasons where I'm stressed out and don't quite realize it for a long time. And so we need some boundaries in our lives. We need some signs, some red flags, some battery indicators to tell us that we are functioning over capacity, that we are stressed out, and we need some help. So if you don't have a Jethro in your life who will tell you what you are doing is not good and you need some help, we have a list for you. This is from the book, 7 Signs of Functioning Over Capacity. And if you want to take notes and write them down, that's awesome. If you'd rather just listen and get the notes later, there's a handout in the back, on the back table. There should be a handout with those 7 things on it. So the first one is an inability to control your emotions. And so I think of it like this, that my husband has this habit of leaving Diet Coke cans all over the house. And 90% of the time, it doesn't bother me at all. There's the Diet Coke can, we pick it up, or he picks it up. I ask him to pick it up, and he does, and it's fine. But when I'm really stressed out, and I'm trying to do too many things, and I'm feeling frazzled, I lose it. I see a Diet Coke can, and I'm like, why can't you pick up your Diet Coke cans? I can't handle it. And my dear husband picks it up, and then he says, I think you need to go to Panera by yourself. All alone. And I do. And Panera is my happy place, and I drink my tea, and I have my scone, and suddenly goes the stress level, and I start to figure out what it is that's been stressing me out, and I work on it and figure it out, and life is good after that. But what we're saying is, if you have an inability to control your emotions, that's a sign you're functioning over capacity, right? 2 is a lack of self-care. If you need to go to Panera by yourself, you go do that. If you need to go downstairs and play a video game, or if you need to go to the golf course, find a way to care for yourself so that you're not blowing up and losing your emotional control in front of the people that you love. Number 3 is illness. Sometimes a chronic cold is just a chronic cold, but sometimes a chronic cold is around because you're way too stressed to care for your body properly, and you need some help. Number 4, and I said to the first group, this is how you know I didn't write this list. Number 4 is chronic lateness. If you find yourself needing to set your clock 15 minutes ahead, or if you find yourself always running late and out of breath, it's possibly because you're trying to function over capacity and do too many things all at once. And so you might need to pay attention to that. Number 5 is self-medicating in excess. Now, this can be really serious. We all know of cases where self-medicating goes wrong. drugs and alcohol, etc. But self-medicating can also be the Cheetos in the milk, right? Too many Oreos, too much ice cream, too much Netflix, whatever it is. If you find yourself going to those comfort things too often, it's a sign that you're functioning over capacity. Number 6 is neglecting important relationships. If you can't remember when the last time you talked to your very best friend, it's a sign that your life is probably too busy, and we need to do something about that. And number 7 is neglecting God. If it's been too long since you've crammed in enough time to pray to God or allow God to renew you with God's peace, then it's a sign that the work is too heavy for you and you need to make some changes. Now, Jethro says that Moses needed to appoint people to be leaders for him, and this is hard. So part of breaking busy is really difficult because it says we need to take some of the stuff that we think we have to do and give it away to someone else. This became a particular problem for me when my children were babies, and I would leave them with my dear husband, who I'm sorry to have thrown under the bus several times in this sermon, but he would watch the babies, and I had to tell myself, sometimes out loud, sometimes over and over again, just because he does it differently doesn't mean he does it wrong, right? Like the child will not die if the pants don't match the shirt. It's okay. Sometimes we feel this need to control everything, and it's not necessary. You can put other people in charge of things. Just because they do it differently doesn't mean they do it wrong. And sometimes, and this is really hard, you find out they do it better than you do. And I found that out too. Sometimes he did it better than I did. Ultimately, this kind of humility is extremely important in everything we do, because what we're saying is that I'm not the only person on the planet that can handle this job, that our God who created all things can actually put someone else in place to do that job as well, that I don't have to be God and replicate God on my own. I don't have to take over God's work. I can let go and allow God's other people to do the work that they were also created to do. Let's not waste time trying to be little gods, right? So Worthington states that we need to follow some guidelines. And here are 3 of the things that I learned from her chapter. Number 1, recognize that we have a limited versus limitless capacity. So this is what I was talking about. We don't have to be God and replicate God. We have a limited capacity where God has a limitless capacity. We don't have to be God in the world. We do what God has given us the work to do. Number 2, discover what recharges you. And I think in this one about the 10 Commandments, did you realize that the longest commandment in that list is the command to take a Sabbath? That's like the one that we skip over. Like, we know it's a command to put God first, and we know it's a command not to kill or lie or et cetera, and then we take like as a suggestion, like a postscript, like, oh, you should probably take a rest once in a while. But that's a command, and it's right there in the middle of the list. We need to pay attention to that and take time to rest. Number 3 is identify your sweet spot. What does the good life look and feel like? And in trying to identify that, I want to share with you a verse from John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus says, "The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy." And isn't that what busyness ultimately does for us? It steals our joy, it kills our souls, and it destroys us. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. But Jesus says, I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. And some translations say life to the full or the fullest. And I like this. Eugene Peterson in The Message puts it this way: I came so that they can have real and eternal life, more and better life than they ever dreamed of. Breaking busy doesn't mean that you have to sit and be bored all the time. You don't have to sign up to meditate 20 hours a day and sit still and break busy so that you can be bored. But you do break those things that are killing your soul and spend time investing in the gifts God has given you. God has given us family, and God has given us friends. God's given us purpose and work. But sometimes we don't take time to enjoy those things because we're so busy doing all of these other things. A life to the full isn't boring or empty. It's full. But it's full of the things that God created us to love and strive toward. As we close, I want to share with you a quote from Frank B Gilbreth. Now, Gilbreth was one of the first efficiency experts of the modern era. He died in 1924, and he spent his whole career trying to convince factories that they needed to work faster and how to help them be more and more efficient. And some of his methods are actually still used today. But as he was trying to convince the world to save time and be more efficient, someone once asked him, "What do you save time for? What are you going to do with it?" And he replied, "For work, if you love that best, for education, for beauty, for art, for pleasure." He then looked over the top of his pince-nez. This is how you know it's really old. His pince-nez for a mumblebee peg, if that's where your heart lies. And I read that and I thought, well, that's good that he wants to save time for beauty or art or whatever. But as Christians, when we read that quote, what do we want to save time for? We want to save time for our God. We want to save time to spend with our Creator, with the one who loves us more than we can imagine. Over and over, we let busyness creep into our lives, blocking our view of the God who created peace, the God who is peace, the God who is love. So the God who promised us abundant life. Let us spend time with our Redeemer and break busy so that we have more time for that. Let us embark on this journey, not so we have more time for Mumblebee Peg, but so that we can have enough time to be the people that God created us to be. Amen. Let's pray together.